Wizards of the Coast has just released the newest wave of Innistrad Midnight Hunt spoilers, and there are some amazing cards tucked away in there. We've got a brand new Teferi, there's a card that hints at the ancient hidden gods of Innistrad, and we even have an ooze that makes Tarmogoyf tokens.
The Magic Historian.
Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. My friends, I hope the day finds you well, because we are going on a mythical adventure of magical goodness. Now, speaking of adventures, if you want to know how the adventure in Innistrad Midnight Hunt has been going so far in terms of the story of the set, I do have the first installment of Innistrad Midnight Hunt lore available on my other channel, Fantasy Geographic. So I'll leave a link to that at the end of the video in case you want to know what's going on Innistrad. Now, let us dive into the card insanity, because we have a number of cool things to cover. We're going to start out by talking about Teferi, who slows the sunset. I mean, how romantic is that? You go for a nice little date on the beach with Teferi, and you're like, I wish this moment could last forever. And Teferi's like, girl, and he snaps his fingers, and it does, and you're like, oh, Teferi, this is great, but, you know, I kind of changed my mind. I want to go and eat some Hot Pockets, because time's standing still, but my stomach hasn't. Free me from this time prison, Teferi! Anyhow, now that I'm done with my little LARPing life roleplay, let's take a look at what the card does. 1 blue and 1 white and 2 for a 4 loyalty planeswalker. His first ability is +1, choose up to 1 target artifact, up to 1 target creature, and up to 1 target land. Untap the chosen permanents you control. Tap the chosen permanents you don't control. You gain 2 life. I really like the way that this ability works. First of all, the fact that you don't have to have all of these different targets. In fact, if you want to, you can have no targets chosen with this and just use this as a +1 gain 2 life ability. But what's really cool about it is the fact that it really does feel like manipulating time, and it's keyed into whether it's beneficial or non-beneficial. And by that I mean, if it's targeting your permanents, they untap, like Teferi is reversing time on them. And if they are your opponent's permanents, they get tapped, like Teferi is either advancing time on them or putting them into some kind of stasis using time. Either way, it's got a very chrono kind of feel to it, and I dig that. You've got the -2 ability. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. I mean, seeing into the future, being able to access future resources, also feels like chrono magic. So, another win for flavor. And the -7 ability, you gain an emblem with untap all permanents you control during each opponent's untap step, and you draw a card during each opponent's draw step. So basically, this turns into a, guess what, I'm playing a really awful counter control deck, and I'm going to have all my lands ready to stop your nonsense constantly. Like, this is going to be an incredibly frustrating card to play against when the ultimate goes off. This is the exact kind of card I don't want to be facing down with my big green tower, because it doesn't have many answers, and white-blue can run roughshod over me, because my deck doesn't have the speed of a little mono-red deck. I'm coming for you! It's kind of like slow rolling to a degree, so white-blue has all the time it needs to set up its insanity. But I do like the underlying flavor concepts of the ability, and also, I should say abilities, and also the way that this ties in to the story of Innistrad. It shows that most likely Teferi is going to make it so that the sun doesn't set quite as fast, while the denizens of Innistrad are in a rush to find the Moon Silver Key, because the Moon Silver Key is literally key to saving mankind. And if you want to know how, well, I'm just teasing you a little bit to get you to go watch the lore video on Fantasy Geographic if you haven't already. All right, so they have spoiled the Moon Silver Key. We'll talk about that in another video, because it didn't really fall into the theme of the mythic stuff we're looking at here. But I love the artwork of this, man. You've got Teferi standing there defiant, his staff upraised, and behind him you have this circle of time magic that is somewhat fracturing. It's a very interesting concept. There's actually 2 different artworks for this card. So let's take a look at the other one. This is Teferi who slows the sunset extended border. And I have to say that this artwork is more enjoyable to me in terms of actually showing like chrono magic progression. That circle that's in front of him, the arcane sigils that are in front of him with the different states, the different phases of the moon shown, like he can control in whatever direction he wants it to go, along with the symmetrical nature of it, right? It's got a very interesting symmetry where you've got the full moon at the top, and then as you progress downwards, you have like essentially almost two half moons that are virtually identical. And then when you move further down, then you've got the two half moons, but at the same, or a little less than half moons, but you have these concentric rings that are out front with different patternings. Like if you look at the ones on the left-hand side, you've got the three circles, but they're kind of headed downwards, while on the right-hand side, they're headed sidewise. So it's got both a symmetrical and somewhat asymmetrical vibe to it, which I dig. But this really does transmit the concept of the time magic. And I don't know, man, having Teferi there at what is presumably dusk, the sun is just setting and he's getting ready to reverse it to a degree. It's just the whole vibe of this card feels like it fits well. I like it quite a bit. Now, there is this additional card, which technically isn't mythic, but because we're talking about Teferi and the concept of time, I wanted to show you a concept that we've had in Magic a number of times. Like, first of all, this is an enchantment called Borrowed Time. 1 white and 2, and when Borrowed Time enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Borrowed Time leaves the battlefield. So we've seen this done in a number of ways. If you're familiar with Standard right now, the most common example you can think of would be Banishing Light, right? Where it's like, boom, here you go. You've been banished by this light. But this is being trapped in time, which is a completely different flavor concept. And you can see Teferi standing there as he's putting this werewolf into a stasis lock. And the flavor text says, Teferi stepped calmly into the fray. Suddenly the sun paused in the sky, and the werewolf snarls froze on their faces. That's some pretty cool flavor. I mean, admittedly, the sun pausing in the sky during the daytime, werewolves aren't really werewolves, but there is that thing where Tovalor is able to keep all of the creatures as werewolves if you have enough werewolves. So the flavor of it is a tiny bit confusing to me in terms of like the sun paused in the sky part of it, but the artwork is awesome, right? It literally looks like the swirls of magic, this chrono magic that's flowing around this werewolf. It looks like it's almost earlier in the day, right? It gives the blue sky vibe showing through, and the grass that is shown through these little slants of magic also seem to be greener, making it seem like it's just literally reversing it into daytime. But I really like the idea of borrowed time, and you put this beast into a time pocket and then boom, it just returns like time hasn't passed for it at all. It makes you wonder about the other enchantments that do this sort of thing. When you're banished, does time still progress for you? This spell would make it so that 100 years later the werewolf would show up and not have aged whatsoever, right? I don't know, just a cool concept. Anyways, let's move on to the next card. This is Sigardian's Savior. 2 white and 3 for a 3/3 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, return up to 2 target creature cards with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. This card screams value. It may not look on the surface, when you look at it, you're like, okay, like, why is this even mythic rare? It's just a 3/3 for 5 mana. Oh, whoop-de-doo, it gives you 2 small creatures from your graveyard back. But when you play this card, you will find that that is a significant advantage. If you've played against any of the Lurus decks where they keep bringing their little donks back, you can tell that this has some genuine potential. This is a solid card. And the artwork is great. You've got this angel who's just probably dived down out of the sky, and she's driving her holy spear into the ground, and it's creating this like meteor-like impact that is blasting these werewolves backwards, right? And these are big, hulking werewolves. And look at this scream on the face of the werewolf in the foreground. This is super intense. I mean, I will admit, I'm not 100% sure how the artwork ties into the concept of the card. Maybe this was originally meant to be some kind of avenging angel that destroyed werewolves, like destroy all tapped attacking creatures or something like that, and they repurposed the artwork, because if you look at it, there's nothing about this to indicate bringing creatures back from the graveyard. I mean, I guess you could say that the spear being driven into the ground is infusing the ground with holy magic and people's bodies will resurrect, but ultimately, to me, this reads like artwork that got repurposed, and I don't blame them for it. It looks absolutely amazing, but it does unfortunately lead to the fact that this card's flavor doesn't tie together perfectly. But not every Magic card will. What are you going to do, right? Let's move on to the next card. That is the Consuming Blob. This thing generates Tarmogoyf. So what? Okay, so it's 2 green and 3 for a star +1 creature. Sounds like a weird way to describe a creature. But anyways, its power is equal to the number of card types among cards in your graveyard. So artifact, creature, planeswalker, instant, sorcery, and so on, right? So it cares about the number of card types in your graveyard. So if you can get this basically thing up to like 7, 8, depending on what you can get going on, it can be pretty beefy, right? But on top of it being a beefcake in that regard, at the beginning of your end step, create a green ooze creature token with this creature's power is equal to the number of card types among cards in your graveyard, and its toughness is equal to that number +1. It's literally Tarmogoyf. Like, take a look. This is Tarmogoyf. 1 green and 1, exact same abilities. Power is equal to the number of card types among cards in your graveyards. Its toughness equal to that number +1. And the Tarmogoyf is a massive creature in Magic. Its power has been diminished over time, right? That is the truth. It's not as amazing as it used to be, but it's still a pretty impressive card. And the fact that this blob can generate creatures like a token every turn that could be as big as 7, 8 is pretty impressive. Do you know, like that is an unending flow of danger for your opponent. So, I mean, I guess the idea is that it consumes up like parts of bodies that are laying around on the battlefield, and there's just so, I guess it eats everything, really. It's shown eating up bodies. You can see skulls, but it's also consuming a symbol of Avacyn from the graveyard, and perhaps other tombstones as well. It's funny because it doesn't look that intimidating, right? Overall, aside from the skulls, it just looks like a big old blob of goop, like your jam got up off your tables, like, so long, I don't even know you had jam this color in the first place. So I guess it just consumes up everything around and then basically is just able to keep propagating itself because it makes a new one of itself every turn, essentially. I mean, obviously not fully copying itself because it doesn't copy its ability to make more tokens, but you get what I'm saying. Like, the blobs that would be made would be the same size as this blob. It's just grow and grow and grow. Now, this one, ultimately, the power level remains to be seen on it, because 5 mana for a creature that, I mean, are you going to have all the different card types in your graveyard? I feel like not. I feel like you're probably mostly going to get this thing as a 3/4 or a 4/5. And so 5 mana for a 3/4 or 4/5 doesn't make much of an impact on the board immediately if it doesn't do anything else. However, if this is left for a few turns and all of a sudden you're generating 3/4s, 4/5s, then you're in value town, right? Like you're laughing pretty hard. I will slap this guy into my green tower and give him a go to see how it works, but I'm really on the fence about his power level. Conceptually, he's a very cool card, but ultimately, he doesn't really stand up to the same pedigree of the Tarmogoyf. Let's be real. The 2 casting cost is what makes the Tarmogoyf so insane. Although, when this card first came out, a lot of people misjudged it. I was amongst them. I had no idea this was going to be the super powerhouse that it was, but most people didn't. In hindsight, people love to come along and be like, I knew it right when I saw it. But if those people were honest with themselves, most of them would know they didn't. But hey, whatever, who cares? It's just a card game. Have fun. Tell people whatever you want. Now, the next card we have to talk about is fascinating in the hints that it gives us as to what's going on Innistrad, as well as just being a crazy good card. So, this is Lear, Disciple of the Drowned. 2 blue and 3 for a 3/4 legendary human wizard with a very odd ability you would never expect to see on a mono blue card. And that is the ability Spells Can't Be Countered. Normally, you would expect, if you're casting a mythic like this, wait, shouldn't it just be my spells can't be countered? So if I put this out, I'm playing blue, and I can't counter my opponent's spells, why would I agree to this? This sounds insane. But then you get to the next ability, and it says, each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard has flashback. The flashback cost is equal to that card's mana's cost. So basically, you're going to get to use all your instants and sorceries twice. And it becomes very, very apparent very quickly, if you think it out, you realize, oh yeah, if you were allowed to counter spells, this card would have to cost way more mana, or it would get banned so quick, because it would make blue control decks so strong. You can use all your counter spells twice. It's like, what? You know, like that would be absolutely bonkers. So I love this card for the oddity of saying spells can't be countered on a blue card. I love it for its ability for you to play instants and sorceries from your graveyard, because that's Value Town. And then the flavor text says, beneath the waves, lost gods stir in their slumber. That is amazing. Somewhere deep under the waters, there are hidden gods, gods that have been lost to Innistrad. Are we going to see them appear for Innistrad's like Crimson Vow set? Are we going to see them appear at the tail end of the story for this set? Will the Celestis being activated somehow lead to the return of gods on Innistrad? I love the idea of gods overall, because they're super powerful beings and sometimes they have inscrutable goals and they just add so much flavor to a world. So I am down with the concept of gods, and I am down with the concept of this card on all levels, including the artwork, man. Look at this. Lear is just standing out there. It doesn't even look like they're standing on like a rocky outcropping. It looks like they're literally standing atop the waters in a Jesus-style moment, while like the waters are almost crashing against them and up around them in a wave that probably never actually touches Lear, because you can see the water kind of spraying away as well, almost like Lear is a giant boulder in the water, and it's like right along the edges of the god's favor. That's how I view it. Basically, Lear has found this ancient, because it's disciple the drowned. The drowned could actually be the name of the entire pantheon of Innistrad like gods. It doesn't just have to be one, but Lear has the god's favors, so can stand atop the water while the water crashes around them without ever touching them. And you can see that there's a ship kind of foundering in the background, these stormy skies. Did Lear actually summon this all up? I love it, man. I love everything about it, right down to the greenish cast of the color of the water that's splashing up on the one side. This is an awesome card. Anyhow, that's all I have to talk about today. So if you liked the video, like the video. If you love what I'm doing, join my Patreon. Big shout out to all my patrons for supporting my channel. Thank you very much. And I will see you all, my friends, for the next video.